Welcome back to Sabbath School Boot Camp. Sabbath School Boot Camp is here to help you think critically and creatively about your Sabbath School lesson. Now, this is week 10, so we are almost done being educated. I hope we get a diploma at the end.
Welcome back to Sabbath School Boot Camp. Our mission is to help you think creatively and critically about your Sabbath School lesson. So let's get in the bunker and get going.
In this lesson, we are talking about the approach we should take toward the study of arts and sciences as Christians. What presuppositions should we have? What are our first principles? I do appreciate that this lesson doesn't subscribe to the conflict thesis that Christianity and science are irreconcilable, that science is the enemy. No, science, the lesson says, is something we should be studying. The lesson does warn us about adopting a naturalistic methodology when we do science, however. Nor are we to be too impressed by the mountain of evidence in favor of things like evolution. I think this is all well taken as far as it goes in the lesson. The lesson was more balanced than I might have expected from a Sabbath School lesson. It tries to walk a fine line between saying that science is worthy and saying that the scientific consensus is not always correct. But Adventists typically have a hard time walking that tightrope. And if you're looking for answers to larger questions about science and religion, you're going to be disappointed because Sabbath School isn't for that, okay? Now, if you have an active class, you have a lot of people participating, they're asking questions, maybe your church is open, or maybe you just have a lot of people on Facebook or something, you may get some questions about evolution, although the lesson does its best to dance around it. If you're live streaming your class, remember that not everyone watching is going to share your views on scientific questions. That should not intimidate you into silence. But you might craft your words in such a way that those viewers feel included and not on the outside looking in. Okay, make them feel included, even if they're not Adventist, even if they're not Christian. Now, science thing aside, the lesson also wants us to develop an appreciation for the aesthetics, particularly beauty. The lesson is more concerned with science than beauty, to be sure, but I think this lesson does a good job at allowing the teacher a lot of freedom of movement. You could spend most of your time developing this idea of beauty and its spiritual importance. I like lessons that are both well-structured but also give the teacher a broad canvas to work with. They help every kind of teacher, from the one who's cramming on Friday night, you know who you are, to the one who treats their class like a college seminar and they take a month to prepare for their one lesson. Our lesson summary is easy this week. We should begin our life's education in the arts and sciences with the belief in God as our creator. Here are a couple of questions to get your class talking. First, how might Christians practice a love of beauty when it comes to our worship as a church? Second, how can Adventist churches prepare their young people for a non-Adventist education? What should churches be teaching them? What kind of foundation should be laid for these young people in churches? All right? How do we want to equip them? What should they have in order to be ready to go out into the world? Slipping over to Sunday, the purpose of this day is to establish at the outset that the creator of the universe is our ultimate inspiration. And so, we must study the arts and sciences with the appropriate reverence for our creator. The lesson is trying to establish a Christian foundation for our study of art and science, in contrast, of course, to the philosophical foundation of a rational naturalism, which you'll find in most universities. Those who study creation with a creator in mind are able to appreciate God's apparent design decisions, the architecture of natural systems, and the vision that God must have had for all creative things. It's not that you cannot understand natural systems from a naturalistic point of view. It's just that our presuppositions shape our conclusions. And when you believe that there is purpose behind these leaves and those roots, you're going to draw conclusions that you wouldn't draw if you didn't believe there is purpose in the universe. Or to put it another way, I think people who read the Bible with the presupposition that God is speaking to them through the text, they're going to have a different experience in the Bible than those who read the Bible from a different viewpoint. your picture of this God character is going to be different depending on that approach to reading. What you get out of it is going to be different as well. What you take for yourself, for the way that you live. Now, that doesn't mean that only Christians can get wisdom out of the Bible, or only Christians can understand the Bible. On the contrary, the academic field of biblical studies is full of insights which were only gained by people who took off their rose-tinted denominational glasses and asked some really interesting questions of the Bible. So it's not that we cannot learn anything from naturalistic approaches to these topics, but I think what the lesson says is really important here. We shouldn't allow the naturalistic approach to these topics to be the only lenses by which we study these topics. When a certain Christian viewpoint was the only way by which we studied the Bible, we had blind spots. Few were willing to ask questions that would get them in trouble with their churches. And then people without Christian presuppositions, or maybe different Christian presuppositions, came in and asked questions that led to some really fruitful fields of study that Christians have later come to appreciate. So I would hold that up as an example, not really a specific example, of why a single lens tends to lead to blind spots that don't advance human knowledge. And this is why I believe we need Christian approaches to all fields of study. So we get to look up Romans 1, Psalm 19, and Nehemiah 9, and then write down what they tell us about God's work as our creator and the danger of worshiping the creature rather than the creator. I don't think these passages really advance the ball very much in terms of what this day is trying to argue, but if you want to stop and reflect on these passages, then go for it. I just want to make one final point. Notice that the lesson says, even after 6,000 years of sin, blah, 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 blah. Notice how carefully this statement was worded, even after 6,000 years of sin. The authors aren't saying the earth is 6,000 years old, but that sin is. It would be good to make this distinction clear, especially if somebody raises the question of evolution, okay? Where does that 6,000 number come from anyway? Why do some people think that the earth is 6,000 years old? Well, just real quick, we have thinkers like the Venerable Bede in the early Middle Ages. We have Isaac Newton in the Middle Ages, after the Middle Ages, I should say. And Bishop Ussher in the early modern period. They all added up the genealogies in the Bible, all came to about the same amount of time, about 6,000 years since Adam. There are a lot of problems with their math because the genealogies in the Bible are not always clear. Matthew, for instance, has 14 generations from Abraham to David, and 14 from David to the exile, and 14 from the exile to Jesus. And so it's 14, 14, and 14, which works out so evenly, even poetically. So how do we know that Matthew didn't leave out a generation or 2 or 10 in order to have 3 perfect sets of 14? We just don't know, right? We just don't know. So we could say that 6,000 years is a very conservative guess. It's certainly much longer because a biblical author's inclination is probably to skip generations in order to emphasize some key ancestors, probably not to add generations that weren't there. Moving over to Monday, we run into Psalm 96, verse 9, worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. We're asked about what it means to worship God in the beauty of His holiness. I think this text does highlight a weak point in our theology, that we do not really value beauty as a spiritual good. We are more taken with the concrete qualities in the world. And this is why we as Adventists are not art positive, is at least compared to some other people. We have a history of poo-pooing on skits and plays and certain instruments and styles of art. We're fine with paintings and skits that are kind of literal reenactments of, say, biblical stories, but we don't exactly have an Adventist Picasso in our midst, right? Someone who pushes the field of art. We don't necessarily encourage budding musicians to go and develop the field of music because music is beautiful and all that is beautiful is godly. No, we want our artists to use their gifts in a very narrow and specific sense. There are exceptions to this, of course. There's a healthy Adventist subculture of concert musicians with Adventist composers and musicians and conductors who write and perform classical pieces because they are beautiful. But it's not the norm. We don't encourage the pursuit of beauty for its own sake. If anything, we warn people against being seduced by beauty in a million little ways. Joanne Davidson at the seminary is one of the few Adventists who have developed a theology of beauty. She wrote a book about it, but I'll give you a link to an article below that was really fantastic, kind of summarizes her argument in the book. Suffice it to say, for the purpose of your Sabbath school class, that holiness is beautiful, that what we appreciate as beauty is in some way linked to the original beauty in the presence of God. We see this in Revelation chapter 4, where the majestic presence of God is described with color and fire and glass and singing. And look, we were made to appreciate beauty, not just observe it. To put it in another way, beautiful things have meaning for us because they are traces of our Creator. There's a reason we are attracted to people we consider to be beautiful. There's a reason we are attracted to waterfalls and mountains and Ansel Adams photographs. Well, as the lesson points out, this doesn't mean that everything that is beautiful is also good. We see plenty of ways in the plant kingdom how beauty is weaponized to draw prey in. But I think in a corrupted beauty, there's still a trace of God. Did God create the lion to maul a gazelle? No, but even in that savage act of chasing and pouncing and clawing, there's something beautiful, a display of strength and majesty and violence that God even uses on occasion as a metaphor, right? Calling himself the heavenly warrior who will destroy his foes. So not everything that is beautiful is good, but I do think everything that is beautiful, however broken that beauty is, reminds us of God. In that sense, beauty is always good, even if the thing that possesses that beauty is not always good, right? The way the beauty is used is not always good, but the beauty itself is good. So I take issue with the lesson's use of Genesis 3:6, where the lesson suggests that because the forbidden fruit was beautiful, it should show us that beauty alone isn't necessarily good. There is presumably nothing wrong with the fruit God created, and because God created it, we expect that it should be beautiful, right? God wouldn't create ugly, distorted, disfigured things. The beauty of the fruit wasn't the problem. Everything was beautiful in Eden. The problem was that Adam and Eve ate something they shouldn't have eaten, all right? Beauty is always a good thing. It always has a fingerprint of our Creator. How that beauty is used can be good or bad. And when we come to worship the Lord, it should involve an appreciation of His beauty and the pleasing things He has created for our enjoyment. We were created to appreciate beauty and enjoy it, so when we cut ourselves off from beauty, we cut ourselves off from God. Trotting to Tuesday, the lesson points us to 1 Timothy 6, where we are warned not to get into quarrels over controversial things, which result in envy, strife, angry words, and suspicion. It's like this lesson knew the 2020 election was coming. The principle that Paul is laying out here is simple. Judge a thing by its fruits. If you enter into this business or study this subject, will it lessen or strengthen your devotion to God? Will you become a more loving and nurturing person or not? Another thing Paul tells us is to learn how to be content with having our basic needs met. Do we have the character where we can go from being content with merely a roof over our head to maybe being a millionaire the next week and still remaining content? Or what about going from being a millionaire back down to just having a basic roof over our head? Are we able to scale economically through life up and down and remain content with God's sovereignty over our lives? All right, it's one thing to be content with riches. It's another thing to love money and chase after it. Chasing after anything is the opposite of what it means to be content. And loving money is the opposite of loving God. Paul is also warning us against pursuing false knowledge, or the kind of knowledge that leads us away from God. This is a nod, I think, to the Adam and Eve story. Did eating the fruit give Eve an education, as the serpent promised? Well, yeah, but the result of that knowledge was separation from God, the source of all true knowledge. Anyways, I think you get the idea. There's a lot of good stuff here in 1 Timothy 6. Now, at the bottom of Tuesday, the authors of the lesson wrote, biological science today, for instance, is predicated on the assumption that life began billions of years ago by chance with no God and no purpose behind it. Yeah, I mean, that's probably true for a lot of people out there. But, I mean, there's a ton of Christians out there who believe God had a hand in evolution. And this is not a topic I really am trying to get into right now. This is just a tactic I do not admire in young earth creationists, to reduce the field so that it's a choice between Christians who believe in young earth creationism and those godless agnostics in the evolution that they believe in. Okay, there are way more Christians in America who believe in evolution than there are Christians who believe in young earth creationism. And the way this question is phrased just pretends that the majority of Christians don't count, that there are no other options even to consider, that you are either an atheist evolutionist or you're a young earth creationist and a Christian. Again, I'm not trying to get into that issue. I'm not trying to argue about who's right and who's wrong. You probably shouldn't get into that either in your class. But what I'm just saying is there are prominent Christians engaged in the field of biology who do not believe life began by chance, that God had a vital role in our evolution. And you may disagree with them, okay? But let's not pretend that all biologists share that presupposition towards naturalism. They don't. But yes, just because people have academic papers and complex models and rigorous testing, it doesn't mean those people are always right. And that's a fair point as far as it goes. Walking over to Wednesday, we are talking about wisdom and foolishness. We are not just looking for knowledge in our study, but wisdom. Proverbs 1:7 tells us that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And that really should be the theme verse for this lesson. The philosophical starting point for all that we do in the world should be the acceptance of God as our sovereign. We need to live as if we must one day give account for our words and deeds. We need to live as if all of this stuff around me isn't mine to abuse or to use as I will. This is a consistent theme in this lesson. The way you approach the study of a subject will help determine the conclusions you reach. If you study the Bible just to learn why you're right, well, you're going to find reasons why you're right, but you will miss a whole lot more in the Bible. So it is with life. Wednesday is all about first principles. What is your starting assumption in life? Because everyone has one. Trucking over to Thursday, we are wrapping up in Job 38, where we are warned about being too confident about our knowledge in light of God. We were all with Job when he wanted to challenge the fairness of God. I mean, we get it, right? It seems so unfair. But Job suddenly gets pushback from God. Where were you when I created all these things? Were you there when the angels first sang for joy? And in essence, what God is asking Job is, are you God? Do you have infinite knowledge? Are you immortal? And it reminds us that your knowledge as a human being is limited because, and I cannot emphasize this enough, we are studying everything from a distance. We weren't there in the beginning. So I think no matter how knowledgeable we may become in a particular field, we should always stay humble about what we know, okay? That's all the time we got for this week. So class dismissed. We'll see you next week.